is this thing on colonialism in terms of political history has an interesting development in that you could argue this transatlantic slave trade partly was the start of imperial colonies. So in terms of defining what colonialism it was primarily European powers that did two different forms of it, which is sort of resource extraction colonies and settler colonies. The key difference, sort of, when talking about them, is rarely did people en masse from those colonies move to the extraction colonies. There would still be people there from the main European empire, but it wouldn't be large immigration of people from the European empire to there. So countries that were settler colonies would be United States, Canada, Australia. Those are sort of the big ones of the settler colonies, but also sort of for Spain, it was countries like Colombia, and Portugal, it was Brazil. So those were the settler colonies. And then in the continent of Africa is where most of the extractive colonies were, where they were extracting raw materials and bringing them back to the empire to be used in food production or to be used in whatever, clothing production. So those were the forms of colonization, and why it occurred. So colonization predated the Industrial Revolution, but the Industrial Revolution, I would say, is sort of amplified its effects. The Industrial Revolution allowed for mass production within Europe, and that mass production created a larger separation of economic productivity in the European countries compared to the colonies, especially once they decolonized in the mid-20th century. After World War II was the beginning of the mass decolonization of Africa. Also, parts of Latin America were more extraction colonies than settler colonies. But Brazil and Colombia are sort of the ones that were considered settler colonies over extraction colonies. But there were other sort of debates there, what type of colonies they were, how this links to aggression, which has been my overall theme, is colonization is a form of imperialism, having an empire, and sort of controlling territory is a form of empire. You're wanting to seize more territory under your own nation, under your own power base. And it is linked to aggression in that this economic system produced cultural hierarchies on a broad level. Cultural hierarchies where people were exposed to subjugation, where people were exposed to racism, where people were exposed to wide levels of forced behavior. And the reasoning for it is to be able to have more resources. And sort of in the realist scholarship, the idea of hegemony, this is more offensive realism. Not all realist schools agree to this, but power is only secondary to security at the state level. So you want to protect your concept, your own sovereignty. So in order to do so, you want to be the biggest military power in town. And one way to show that is by having territory under your control. And that's sort of offensive realism. Sort of defensive realism says, regardless, you have the potential of security spirals, whether it be lack of deterrent or just chaos building. And that leads to military aggression. It is relevant in terms of how cultures have responded post-colonization. We're officially more, you could say less than 40 years since South Africa apartheid was sort of the capstone of all of the decolonization product. But you could also say less than 50 years, but between under 40 and under 50 years since colonization ended. So it's only about one or two generations removed from colonization. And in previous videos, I talked about intergenerational trauma, and colonization was one big intergenerational trauma. It produced hierarchical thinking that led to imperialistic endeavors. And the reasoning behind imperialism is often greed. It's not always greed. Sometimes it is fear, which is sort of where the realist school comes in. But it's often greed. And thus, in order to recognize that colonization is important in understanding why non-industrial countries, or sort of what people call developing countries, experience more symptoms of poverty, more symptoms of state fragility. It's because up until recently they weren't their own independent states, and so when a state is young in its independence, there's often vyers for varying forms of power, and until there is sort of a functioning economy to sort of maintain power in a stable source, it leads to civil disobedience and chaos. And overall, most people say colonization was bad. Sort of the counter arguments is that it provided the cultures with better technology, it provided the cultures with infrastructure, it provided the cultures with Western tools that are better at passing down information. But those tools were more or less for those Western imperial projects. They weren't always necessarily for the cultures that they were subjugating. Anyways, thank you for watching. Always feel free to comment down below, and I will see you in the next one.